part 1, because it's a long one. Look, 17 pages. It'll take ages for YouTube to upload that. So this is chapter 16, part 1. Arlo padded down the length of the branch and looked out into the falling snow. "Can you see her?" Caspar asked as he slumped against the trunk. He knew the answer even before Arlo shook his head. The Midnights had taken her, but did that mean they would put an end to Utterly here in Rumblestar, or would they take her back to the Harpy in Everdark? Caspar winced at the pain in his leg where a talon had cut his skin, but it was nothing compared to the pain of knowing that if he'd climbed just a little bit faster and kept up with Utterly, perhaps none of this would have happened. Caspar felt almost dizzy with guilt as Arlo traipsed back towards him, a tear smudging down his snout. Sorry. They were They were alone now, completely alone, and it didn't seem like anyone at the castle even cared. Arlo climbed into Caspar's lap and Caspar hung his head. Things were spiralling out of control and there didn't seem to be any way to fix it all. He thought about composing another to-do list in his head, but then he realised that he didn't want to. All he wanted, really, was to see Utterly again. Things had felt a lot more hopeful with her around, and even though they'd both said some truly awful things earlier, and Caspar had tried to convince himself that he didn't need Utterly, or indeed anyone else, as a friend, he knew he did. Because it wasn't enough to go through life just with acquaintances and work colleagues. It was important to have real friends too, people to open up to, and laugh with, and make you feel less lonely. And little by little, those things had been happening with Utterly, until he'd blown it. Tears rolled down Caspar's cheeks, and as he held Arlo close, he thought of home. He missed his parents so much the pain in his chest was almost unbearable. And suddenly his mum's forgetfulness and his dad's inability to wear a watch didn't seem quite as irritating as they had done back in Little Wallops. Because at the end of the day, when you were alone in the forest and down on one knee, those things just didn't matter. His parents had been right all along. What counted really was love and friendship. Caspar hadn't wanted to make friends in case Candida and Leopold ruined it again, but it turned out that he was capable of mucking up friendship all by himself. And now he was coming to terms with the truth. Making friends was painful and messy and frightening, but it was worth the trouble because life was a whole lot better when you lived it alongside a friend. Caspar took a deep breath and tried to think like Utterly. If she was the one left behind, she wouldn't stand for the Midnights getting in her way. She'd keep going after the familiar face. And so that's what Caspar would do, hoping hard that there was a chance Utterly could be here in Rumblestar still, especially if the Midnights were keeping her bait to catch him. Caspar wiped away his tears and looked down at Arlo in his palm. If in doubt, keep climbing. Arlo brushed his own tears from his snout and tried to look brave, which Caspar took as a sign that the tiny dragon agreed they needed to keep searching, whatever might have happened to Utterly. Caspar grimaced as he hauled himself up. A dark red patch had seeped through his dungarees, but as he pushed on up the tree, with Arlo flopped miserably on his shoulder, Caspar tried not to think about how high they were now. The trees back home stopped eventually, but these trees seemed to keep going forever, and it wasn't just the height that made the trees seem odd. The further Caspar climbed, the smoother the trunks became, and the branches grew less frequent, so that Caspar had to stretch further between each one. He paused for a moment and stared at the trunk more closely. The wood looked as if it had been smoothed and buffed and chiselled into shape rather than growing this way naturally. Caspar blinked. The tree seemed just like the fancy table and chair legs back in the dining room at school. He climbed further and saw that above him now was a rectangular platform made from slats of wood positioned through the trees. He turned to Arlo. "I think we might have been climbing up a gigantic table leg." Utterly had said that snow trolls lived in Shiverbark Forest. What if this sky-high furniture belonged to them? The trolls Caspar had come across in fairy tales back in England didn't seem the sort of creatures who would busy themselves with carpentry, but here in Rumblestar he was learning to expect the unexpected. He continued to climb until finally he reached the wooden platform and heaved himself over the top. As Caspar had guessed, he found himself on a giant tabletop. There were numerous board games open on its surface, including a Scrabble board, which Caspar had accidentally blundered into the middle of, scattering the letters in all directions. He looked up to see that the branches had been completely cut away above the table for a good few metres, creating a pocket of space right up to where the forest canopy started. Suddenly his head began to spin and the pain in his leg made it feel close to buckling, and though Caspar tried to focus, the more he concentrated, the more his vision blurred. And the last thing Caspar saw, before he blacked out completely, were 10 very hairy and very surprised faces staring down at him.